Everyone is arguing about President Trump's move on Venezuela. In truth, it's not about drugs, not about terror, and not about oil, at least not the way people think. They're missing the point. Venezuela sits on the largest oil reserves on Earth, over 300 billion barrels, worth nearly $17 trillion. But here's the twist. The United States doesn't need that oil. China does. China buys nearly 90% of Venezuela's crude, almost all of Iran's oil, and a massive share of Russia's exports. Trump understood something most leaders ignore. Power doesn't come from owning energy. It comes from controlling who gets it. Destabilize Venezuela, pressure Iran at the same time. China suddenly loses 70% of its non-US regulated oil supply. No fuel for a Taiwan war. No energy for AI dominance. No BRICS currency replacing the dollar. No shots fired. No war declared. Just leverage. As Marco Rubio put it, we don't need Venezuelan oil, but we will not allow this hemisphere's energy to be controlled by America's adversaries. This isn't chaos. This isn't luck. This is Trump playing the long game, outthinking rivals, reshaping alliances and winning without asking permission. That's not recklessness. That's strategy.
We will make America great again.
Everyone is arguing about President Trump's move on Venezuela. In truth, it's not about drugs, not about terror, and not about oil, at least not the way people think. They're missing the point. Venezuela sits on the largest oil reserves on Earth, over 300 billion barrels, worth nearly $17 trillion. But here's the twist. The United States doesn't need that oil. China does. China buys nearly 90% of Venezuela's crude, almost all of Iran's oil, and a massive share of Russia's exports. Trump understood something most leaders ignore. Power doesn't come from owning energy. It comes from controlling who gets it. Destabilize Venezuela, pressure Iran at the same time. China suddenly loses 70% of its non-US regulated oil supply. No fuel for a Taiwan war. No energy for AI dominance. No BRICS currency replacing the dollar. No shots fired. No war declared. Just leverage. As Marco Rubio put it, we don't need Venezuelan oil, but we will not allow this hemisphere's energy to be controlled by America's adversaries. This isn't chaos. This isn't luck. This is Trump playing the long game, outthinking rivals, reshaping alliances and winning without asking permission. That's not recklessness. That's strategy.
In this video, we look at the arrest of President Maduro of Venezuela by American forces. We look at international law. What does international law say in the circumstance? How about the United Nations Charter? What does it say in particular regarding this situation? This is President Maduro. And we also look at the American domestic law. What does it say about the powers of the president to invade any state in America or to invade or attack any state outside America, a sovereign state? We look at all of that in this video. We look at the timeline. At approximately 1:45 a.m. Caracas time, President Maduro was in a secure location in the capital. The capital of Venezuela is Caracas. He was in one of the several safe houses where the president usually stays. So in Venezuela, we understand that the president has more than one safe house. Okay, it's quite unlike the White House that is just one. Okay, one location, the president stays there, 24/7 is protected there. So in Venezuela, we understand that as a result of past experiences, assassination, attempt, and all of that at the life of the president is given a number of safe houses where he can move in here in the morning, in the evening, or in the night is another safe house without necessarily letting anybody to know where he is, except members of his security units and also members of his family. Little number of persons that would get to know exactly where the president is. So on the night of the arrest, the president was in one of those safe houses with his wife. That house can hardly be broken into. It's fortified, right? Now, at 2 a.m., the first explosions were heard across Caracas, okay? We heard the American forces dropping bombs, dropping explosions here, there. We now understand that that was diversionary. That was intended to distract the attention of the security forces in Venezuela, move all of them to the area of attack for them to see how they can cordon off and take charge of the situation, while the other operation was going on at a place that none of them ever suspected. So these strikes were diversionary. While the security forces scrambled to cordon off and take charge of the areas attacked, a much smaller and not controlled operation was taking place elsewhere. That elsewhere was the residence of the president at the time. A team of Delta Force operators, commandos of the American Army, transported by stealth helicopter, landed at the exact location of President Maduro. The president has several of such houses, safe houses that he normally stays. But on this night, the American forces were able to go directly to the exact location where the president stays. How did they do that? You get to know, right? Note that this was a safe location, not often disclosed to anybody except bodyguards and members of the family. According to sources familiar with the operation, one of which is Prime News in America, right? These American commandos did not have to fight their way in. They walked in. They never fired any shots. They never had it so hard to go in. They simply walked in. How was that possible? You get to know. The guards on duty had all been told to stand down. Who tells the guards to stand down? Can it be a foreign commander telling the guards of another country to stand down? No. It is often a familiar voice that tells the guards to stand down. The security cameras had all been disabled. Alarm systems had been deactivated. The guards on duty surrendered without firing a shot. Not a single shot was fired. They had arms, but they never fired a shot. What does that tell you? Huge compromise. Now, Maduro was arrested together with the wife. The entire operation lasted less than 20 minutes. And in no time, Maduro and the wife were loaded into a waiting aircraft and then flown out. Before the military in Venezuela and other security forces could understand what was going on, the helicopter carrying the president and the wife was already crossing into the international airspace where Venezuela has no control. And as we speak, President Maduro in handcuff here and the wife, they are in the United States of America being profiled to stand trial. Now, you ask the question, how did America go in and arrest the president of a sovereign nation and go out without any shot being fired? No shot was fired. Here is the answer. By infiltration of Maduro's inner security. Go back in history. One of the easiest ways to arrest powerful people, one of the easiest ways to disarm powerful people, whether during wartime or peacetime and all of that, is by infiltration of the inner circles, the friends, the associates, the security of that powerful man. That's one of the oldest tricks in the world. And that trick was played against Maduro in Venezuela. The story has it that the first thing that was done by the American forces was to find members of Maduro's security circle who were willing to play ball. You play ball when you compromise and you are paid for it. Okay? 3 bodyguards were identified. 1, a senior member of Maduro's security team in his late 80s, whom we understand had a sick daughter. He needed money to send a sick daughter for treatment. The people that contacted him made that very possible treatment of the daughter and all of that for him. The second person was a younger guard who was simply ambitious and needed better opportunities. So he was brought in, he keyed in, and worked effectively for the American forces. The third person was a veteran security official who had served under Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez. So he served in the previous administration and was also considered fit to serve in this administration, that is, in Maduro's administration. So all 3 of them worked, giving information, giving details of Maduro's food, giving details of where he stays, Every movement of Maduro was being communicated to the American forces, okay, for them to be able to use in planning and executing their operation. The approach of these top security guards, we're not talking about those that stay at the fence, those that stay at the gate. We're talking about top security guards that when they give command, it is followed through by every other person in the chain. These were the persons that were infiltrated against President Maduro. Okay? Now, we understand that to approach these people, intermediaries needed to be consulted, former colleagues also needed to be consulted, former colleagues of these guards needed to be consulted, and some family members, some close associates under very tight security needed to be consulted to woo these people to work for America. And it worked, right? Money was promised, huge sums, we understand, and family members were moved into the United States for safety ahead of the attack. Okay, so you know that when the attack is eventually executed, the lid would have been blown open. Questions would have been asked. How was it possible? And so it will be known that there was a compromise from within. So how do you protect members of my family? Okay, we're going to move them into America. They stay there so that when the attack is eventually done, nobody is going to attack them. Okay. Now, that was an assurance to the compromised security guards that their interests were well protected by America and nothing is going to happen to them. With the compromised security, the operations went on peacefully without any resistance whatsoever. Okay? So when you have members of your household, the people that work very closely with you, you should also have it at the back of your mind that any of them can be compromised against you, for good or for bad. Now, this is President Maduro, tall guy. Yeah. In all the photographs you see that he's taller than everybody. Everybody that has grabbed him or done one or two things with him, you see that he's taller, far taller than every other person. This is President Maduro. This is an American security personnel. And this is President Maduro's wife. And this is the plane that conveyed them out of Venezuela. This is President Donald Trump announcing it to the American people and to the world. So it was a case of America, a sovereign nation, moving into Venezuela, another sovereign nation, okay, arresting its president somewhere here, and then together with the wife and taking the president back here into America. Right? Now, let's look at the issues of law, the legalese. What does the law say in the situation? What's the position of international law? What's the position of the United Nations Charter? What's the position of the domestic law of America regarding what just happened? This is President Trump addressing a world press conference and then telling the world that this was done by America. No mincing of words. This was done by American forces, pressing the gentlemen, the ladies and the gentlemen that did the operation, that they were professional, they did so well, they made him proud, and all of that. So we look at the legalese. How lawful is the attack by America against a sovereign nation? Here is the answer. Under international law, the invasion of a sovereign state by another is an act of aggression, and same is prohibited by international law. Now, you find a provision in the United Nations Charter that deals with that and tells you you do not have the right as a state to enter another state in any part of the world to do any military operation. Okay? That section of the United Nations Charter is Article 2, Sub 4 of the UN Charter. What does it say? All members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. It has never been the purpose of the United Nations to invade a country by another state. You just go in. No. So now, what President Trump ordered and authorized in America, does it qualify for the use of force? Does it qualify for threats? Is it within the purposes of the United Nations? We're going to see that as we proceed. Now, the United States actions would only be lawful if, one, it is supported by a resolution of the United Nations Security Council. By the United Nations Charter, Security Council is expected to give resolution before the invasion of a country. There has to be that resolution, approved by the 5 members of the United Nations Security Council. So, if there was a resolution, then the attack on Venezuela would be lawful. 2, if the U.S. was acting in self-defense, U.S. has seen by intelligence and by the cameras, by the border, that Venezuela is almost moving into the United States through the borders to attack its citizens. Weapons of mass destruction, they have been stationed already by the borders and they're about being detonated. America gets wind of that and moves in immediately to destroy the weapons of mass destruction, to make them powerless, and also move into Venezuela to uproot the factory or the station where the weapons of mass destruction are being kept. America will be justified because that action is in self-defense and the United Nations Charter and international law sees it as lawful. The third would be if there was consent by the lawful government of Venezuela for the invasion. Remember that not long ago, Nigeria, America made some strikes in Nigeria. America did say that it had the consent of the government of Nigeria, and just before 24 hours was over, the Foreign Affairs Ministry of Nigeria also made a press release that truly America had been authorized to carry out the strikes. Okay, so consent. Without these 3 exceptions, any other action taken in Venezuela by America makes it unlawful, right? Now, at this point, it is clear that there was no United Nations Security Council resolution for the U.S. to intervene in Venezuela. There was none. It is also clear at this point that the U.S. has not been the victim of an ongoing or imminent act of aggression or attack by Venezuela. It is also clear that the attack was not authorized by the deposed president. The president could not have authorized an attack against his government. From every indication, therefore, the attack on Venezuela by America is against international law. It is completely against international law. So, if you define the U.S. actions in Venezuela as an act of force, remember, United Nations Charter talked about act of force, which truly it is. What happened in Venezuela is an act of force within the meaning of Article 2, Sub 4 of the United Nations Charter. Then the U.S. has engaged in a prohibited act since none of the justifications apply. None of the 3 justifications apply. United Nations resolution, consent, and acting in self-defense. None applies. America has therefore committed the crime of aggression under international law, which is unlawful use of force against another country. The president represents the country. You use force, you remove him, you take him out. That's an act of aggression. Aggression is highly prohibited under international law. International law, United Nations Charter, aggression is highly prohibited. Now, what if it was just a law enforcement operation? Now, America has defended this action. If you listen to the press conference, if you watch the press conference, you would see that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, described the Venezuelan president as a fugitive of American justice, somebody that was running away from justice, that he was involved in narco-terrorism, shipping hard drugs into America. America was looking for him and all of that. Okay? He has justified it to say that it was not the use of force, but rather law enforcement operation. That America moved in to arrest someone that has been terrorizing America through the use of drugs, through the shipping of drugs into America. And that it wasn't the use of force, it was about law enforcement. Now, what then will be the position if the intervention was not the use of force as defined by the United Nations Charter, but merely law enforcement operation? Here is the answer, right? One has to take into account the operations, a number of factors, okay, one of which is the scale of the operation. The second of which is the target of the operation. You are saying it was not the use of force. It was about law enforcement to arrest a felon and bring him to justice in America. So a number of factors will be looked into under the law. The scale of the operation is the number one. Number two, the target of the operation. Number three, the location of the operation, and also the broader context of the operation. Right? Now, media reports have shown that 15,000 US troops had been deployed to the region as of December. 15,000. We are talking about the scale of the operation. Okay? We also understand that America had deployed the US aircraft carrier, right, near Venezuela. Aircraft carrier does not come for peace. It doesn't come for Christmas celebration. It comes with a very clear intention, war. If you mess with us, we open all the windows here, and then we get you rent in. We understand that several helicopters were used on the day of the operation. Several helicopters, some dropping bombs here, striking there, right? We also understand that approval for the operation came from the highest US authority, the president. And President Trump never minced words about it. He said he authorized it, right? The target was the president of a sovereign state. Remember, we made mention of targets. And was executed against the background of an unfriendly relationship between the two states, right? Now, in this context, it is hard to see how these can be anything other than the use of force. Look at the scale, look at the target, look at the location, look at the broader context. 15,000, plenty helicopters. We're also talking about aircraft carrier. In this context of all of this, it is hard to see how this can be anything other than the use of force within the meaning of Article 2 of the United Nations Charter. By international law, the operation that went on in Venezuela by the government of the United States of America is against international law. It is unlawful. It is against the acceptable limits of international law, right? Now, let's also look at it from the angle of the United States domestic law. What does the domestic law in America say? Okay. American law, that is, in particular, the Constitution of the United States of America, places significant prohibitions and restrictions on the president's power and ability to invade another state, be it a state within the United States of America or a state outside America, a sovereign state. Okay? Only the Congress can declare war. That's the law in America. The power to declare war is vested solely in Congress, not the president. The president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces and has the authority to deploy the soldiers to go address an emergency situation, something that is almost getting out of hand. The president sends soldiers to go, maybe one of the states in America, address the situation and get back to the barracks. Okay? But the fact that he is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces doesn't give him all the rights to use the military in military operations outside the United States of America. Initiating a large-scale invasion of a foreign country typically requires a congregational declaration of war or authorization for the use of military force. Whichever way you look at it, the invasion fails every measurement or test of legality. You measure it from international law angle, it fails. You measure it from the domestic law angle, the Constitution of America and the powers of the president to use the armed forces in armed operation, it also fails, right? Now, this is President Donald Trump at the press conference addressing the world, giving details of the operation, how it happened, and the security chiefs are here with him, okay? Each of them also making contributions, telling the world how the operations went on. This is the President of America, President Donald Trump. Now, finally, before we end this video, what is the sanction? If the United Nations comes to the conclusion that America has violated international law by the invasion, if that is done, what the United Nations normally does is to prescribe sanction against the state that has violated international law. The question here is, can the United Nations muster the courage to sanction America under President Trump? Can the United Nations do that? Now, let me take you through the process for the sanctioning of a state that has gone against international law. You have to run it through the Security Council of the United Nations. You have to get the concurrence of all members of the Security Council before you can pass that resolution to sanction. The Security Council today has 5 members. America is one of the 5 members. For you to have that resolution to sanction a state, you must have the concurrence of the 5 members. If you have 4/1, that is, one of the members vetoing the proposed resolution, that's the end of it. So now the question. America is one of the 5 members of the United Nations. I said, if one says no, that's the end of the resolution. The approval of 4 cannot make the resolution. You must have 5 members agreeing. So now, America is one of the 5. Can America say yes in support of a resolution against its government? You can see the answer. The answer is obvious. America is going to say no, that you cannot sanction us. Therefore, it would be impossible for the 5 members of the United Nations, Great Britain, okay, Russia, France, Germany, United States of America, okay? It will be difficult for the 5 members of the United Nations to pass a resolution to sanction America. If all 4 passes the resolution, America says no, that's the end of the resolution. So the reality is that some countries are equal, other countries are more equal than the others. And to move forward, perhaps there is need to review the powers of the United Nations Security Council and possibly have more members come into the United Nations so that we now have what can be called quorum, so that we now have the majority having their way. Okay? So that when one says no, the majority can still have their way. But until that is done, the reality here is that America is very likely going to walk away with what it has done in Venezuela, as it is difficult to sanction them under international law without the concurrence of the 5 members of the United Nations. Many thanks always for watching.